Hi class, it's Bill Berry. This is a short week if you're with me in class because we have our midterm exam. So we will cover one topic, however, and that is a short one on variables and data types. We're going to look at variable naming rules. We've already used them, but let's look very specifically at exactly how you can name them. These rules are not that uncommon across languages. They're often, sort of in the realm of what we'll cover here. So let's talk about that specifically and also look at a list of reserved words that you cannot use as names. Words that are specific to the language you can't use as variable names. Then let's turn our attention to data types. We want to understand JavaScript's use of data types, how it looks at things, and also just give you a little contrast with how this works in other languages. We're going to look at ways that you can check the data type. If you want to know what does JavaScript actually think this thing is, you can find that out. We're also going to look at a strange thing that maybe we don't look at exactly in other languages, but in a language like JavaScript, we have this idea of equality. JavaScript does extra things to help us out, and that kind of leads to some odd situations. So what does equal mean, and what does really, really equal mean? And then a brief look at converting between data types. So let's jump in and cover variable naming. So when you're programming in any language, it's going to have certain rules for how you name things. These names we'll call identifiers. That's a general term for naming whatever, right? Names that you get to make up. You get to make up names for variables and functions and some other things that we probably won't cover, like objects, classes. But we are, for the moment, going to just focus on what these names are and what are the rules associated with those. So let's look at that. First, names can't be a reserved word. So any words that are specific to the language that it would confuse it to see it in the context of a variable name are just plain disallowed. So we have a complete list on the next page. But to give you an example, words like for, right? We know that there are for loops and that there are while loops. You can't use the word for in lowercase for a variable name nor while, right? These are specifically reserved words for the language. Don't try to use these as variable names. And now if you're using most editors, most reasonable editors are going to highlight these things and show them in a different way. So you kind of get the idea based on the way that the editor shows them that they're probably not a good idea. But we'll look at that list of reserved words. Also keep in mind that variables are case sensitive. The language is case sensitive. So be careful when you type. So the word total, lowercase T-O-T-A-L, that's a perfectly fine identifier. So is the word capital T-O-T-A-L, but it's not the same variable. So if you use one in one place and one in the other, you're not talking about the same variable. Now in some languages that's not really the case, and you can case them any way you like, but certainly in JavaScript and C and Java and a lot of modern languages, you have to case things specifically. Also, what can you include in your name? Well, you can certainly use letters. You can also use digits, and most languages allow a couple of special characters to be included in the deal as well. And in JavaScript, here are those special characters. You can use a $sign. You can use an underscore. Both of these are a little bit unusual to see, and often when we use them, we might mean something special, so I wouldn't generally plan on using them, but you can if you need to. The other thing that is notably absent, you cannot use spaces, right? So if you want to say customer balance, that's fine, but you have to run them together. You can't put customer space balance, right? The other thing is you can't start with a digit. In a lot of languages you have to start with a letter. In JavaScript you just can't start with a digit. So you could start with one of these special characters, and sometimes in some weird cases you might see that. But certainly a letter is fine. Just don't start with a digit, because if it sees a digit it thinks a number's coming and that's going to confuse it. The other thing is, even though it's not a rule for naming things, by convention we tend to name things in what's called camel casing. And that is, you start with a lowercase letter, and then if you have multiple words, you uppercase the first letter of each subsequent word. Otherwise, you just run the whole thing together. So your eyes see that uppercase letter, and it knows to sort of visually separate that that is total hours. It's atypical to use the underscore in a lot of modern, modern code. You won't see that a lot, but you can, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's certainly a valid character, but they're kind of hard to type, and generally what you see is that. So these are the general rules for naming things, functions or variables in JavaScript. Now let's take a quick look at what reserved words you cannot use. This is the complete list of reserved words in the language. Here you go. Right, so look that over. You won't know all of those words yet. We haven't covered them and we won't in this course, but you do see that there are quite a few of them that should look very familiar. Can't use else, can't use for, can't use function, if. All right, you can't use, let's see, what else is, we'll cover a lot of these later. What else? Var. Okay, that's another good one, while. So these things, don't use them. They are a specific identifier in the language. This is, again, very typical across languages. Each language has its own list of words. Don't use those words when you're coming to, when you're coming to name things. All right, so let's switch our attention now to a quick look at data types. So when JavaScript is working with data types, what data types are actually allowed in JavaScript? How does it, how does it store things? What different forms, different data types are used internally? And then how can we convert between them? So first of all, there are in the world a whole bunch of different data types, right? It's not restricted to just the list that we're looking at here in some languages. And one thing to know very specifically here is that in other languages, you spend a lot more time thinking about and worrying about data types, right? JavaScript is a loosely typed language, so we sort of play a little bit loose with variable data types. In language like Java, you make a big deal about data types. For instance, when you declare a variable, you have to say, in essence, hey Java, this thing is going to be an integer here and now and forever. It is an integer and only integer things may go in this variable, right? So you always are making these pronouncements at the beginning to say what is the data type of the thing that goes here, and you must be careful to only try to stick things that match in there. But in JavaScript, we just don't do any of that kind of thing, right? We just sort of throw things in the variable and JavaScript figures out what's going on, and for the most part, it gets it right. So, we just sort of do what we need to do. But internally, JavaScript really does have a couple of specific data types. You do have a thing called a string, right? So there are strings. We've worked with strings. We've concatenated them and worked with those. Great. We also have numbers. So things that are floating point numbers or integers, whatever, it's in a general category called number. We also have Booleans. Now, we won't really create these variables very often, but it is a real thing. You can make Booleans, right? And we'll see a way to convert things to them if you want. Then there's some sort of special things that also can happen. You can have a thing called undefined. So if you have a property, for instance, in the document object model, if you have a property that is not defined, it doesn't exist, there isn't one of those things, you will get undefined, right, in lowercase letters. And then there's a special one that we won't see much in our course because we're not spending much time on objects. You can have null as well. Null is not the same thing, but null is an object reference that's not currently pointing to an object. Right? It's something that could point to an object, but it doesn't right now. So it's just sort of empty in that regard. So we'll call it null, N-U-L-L, lowercase. So these are the basic categories, and we're going to mostly work with these two, right, as we have in the past. But these things do exist. But again, because of loose typing in JavaScript, you can throw anything you want into any variable. So in one line, you can say var foo equals quote hello. On the next line, you can say foo equals 3.14. On the next line, you can say foo equals parentheses, 3 equal 4. So you can use these types very interchangeably, and a particular variable can have different types of data over its lifetime. All right, so that's a little bit about data types. Now let's look at how you can check the data type. If you want to find out what JavaScript data type is associated with a particular variable, you can ask by using this special keyword type of. Right? So when you see type of, and then you put a variable after it, or an expression, any expression after it, then JavaScript is being asked to tell you how it is storing that thing. So if we have a variable called a, and we store hello in it, and then we ask, hey, JavaScript, what is the type of a? What is the data type associated with a? It will output lowercase string, saying, hey, this thing is a string. Now if we turn around and stick 4.25 in it, and we ask again, it's going to say number. This thing is a number. Now, if we do this weird Boolean thing that I was mentioning where we say a equals 3 equal 4, how the heck do you interpret that? Well, this has a higher precedence, right? So it will check whether 3 is equal to 4 first, and that turns out to be false, right? 3 is not equal to 4. Therefore, a is a Boolean variable that's going to have a value of false. And so since a is a Boolean, we say, hey, what is the type of a? It's going to come out with Boolean, right? Because it has a true-false value in it. That's a Boolean. So you can ask, if you ever need to, you can use that in a condition. For instance, you could say if type of whatever variable looking at equal string, right? So if the type of this variable is a string, then do the following stuff. So you can use that as it's convenient for you if you need to check the types of variables. Now JavaScript, because of its sort of uniqueness and its effort to try to be very helpful to you, sometimes it can make some, quote, helpful choices that turn out to be a little bit odd and maybe not quite what you expected. So an example of that is if you ask JavaScript, hey, is 1 equal to, quote, 1? Right? Is the number 1 equal to the string 1? And JavaScript will say, yep, it certainly is. Now, you might say, well, that's helpful because if it's either thing, maybe I'm considering that to be the same as 1, and so maybe I think that's okay. But there can be times when you absolutely do not want that to do it. I don't want necessarily for the number 1 to be the same as the string 1. For my particular use, maybe that would be a bad thing to confuse the two, right? Because I need to know a string from a number. So you have the choice of either converting it yourself, as we'll see in a bit, but another thing that you can do is use this unusual comparison operator that JavaScript has that you don't see in a lot of other languages. In fact, I can't think of one right now that does exactly this, and that is equal, equal, equal. So when you're comparing equality, if you put 3 equal signs right together, what it's saying is really, really, truly equal, right? True equality. And that says, do not do any, quote, helpful conversion. Don't do anything helpful to me when you compare these two things. Just tell me whether they're absolutely, really the same. True equality. So if I ask, is 1 truly equal to string 1, the output's going to say, nope, it is not. It is not the same thing. So you will see some recommendations online that you always use this because most of the time you kind of want that, right? You kind of want to be very specific. So you could just use the triple equal all the time unless you want it to be sort of wiggly. And if you want the wiggliness, you can use 2 equal signs. So use that as you will, but that's sort of an interesting thing and an interesting operator that JavaScript has that you will not see elsewhere. All right, next and last, how can you convert between data types? We've already seen a little intro to this here and there, but let's look very specifically. If you want to convert something to a string, the way that you can do it, one way is that you can use this word string in uppercase letters. The uppercase should give you a clue that this is a little bit different. Something's a little odd here, but we're not going to do anything about that. We're just going to note that it's a little strange. But when you use uppercase string, notice that looks like the name of the data type. And then you put something inside the parentheses, it is going to attempt to convert whatever you ask into a string. And that should succeed because just about anything can be turned into a string, right? And you can also say the number, whatever you're talking about, or whatever variable or whatever you're working with, you can put a dot after it and use the toString method. And that says, you know, when you put a dot after something, then you know you're treating it as an object, and then this is called a method. So you can use the toString method, notice the uppercase S, and that will also convert to a number, or sorry, to a string. Now, one other thing to note is there may be some other functions and methods that do this implicitly that you might not think of it, but it does. So for instance, if you want to convert something to a fixed number of decimal places, maybe it's 0, maybe it's 2, but you always want to show with the 2 decimal places regardless, you can use toFixed, and that's a method. So you put whatever you want to convert, put a dot, you say toFixed, and you say how many decimal points. Well, that's great. It's going to certainly do that work and make sure that the thing always shows that number of decimals. But to do that, it's actually returning a string. So at this point, foo contains a string, not a number. All right, so you have to be a little careful because if you turn that into a string, then trying to do math on it might result in concatenation instead of addition. So there's some ways to convert things to strings. You also can convert something to a number, and we've used this one, right? You use capital N number, that will create a number out of the thing that is here. So that will mean that after this line of code, the var is going to contain a number data type, right? Var is going to be numeric, and it's going to have the number 18 in it. Now, there can be some weird things that can happen. For instance, if it can't convert this thing, you might get this weird not a number, n lowercase a uppercase n. You might get not a number, but that's something that we can sort of handle specifically later. You can also convert things to Boolean, but this is sort of odd. We're not going to use this a lot, but programmers like Booleans, and so there are times when this is very useful. You can convert anything to a Boolean, and you can use the Boolean, capital B, right? You can use Boolean to convert whatever you're trying to convert to a Boolean. But understand that it's going to have its own ideas about what that means. So for instance, if you convert a 0 to Boolean, it's going to say false, but if you convert any other number, anything non-zero, to a Boolean, it's going to be true. Right? So that's its understanding of numbers turning into Booleans. With strings, if you pass it an empty string, you're going to get false, but if you pass it a string with anything in it, anything between the quotes, or a variable that contains something other than an empty string, it's going to come out with true. So Boolean is a hint to turn things into Boolean, just as numbers and just as string, and the actual name of the data type with the capitalized first letter is the magic there that can help. So that's a little quick look at converting between data types, and in fact that's the end of our quick lecture for this week. And then I do have some resources for you, and that is that there is a good link here for the W3 schools, and it will give you some more specific information about type conversion if you want to learn a little more than you have here. So that brings us to the end of our quick lecture for this week. So I hope that's been useful to you, and I appreciate you watching this video, and certainly we'll have some more fun stuff coming next, so continue watching. Thanks for watching this one.